Welcome back to Southern Ghost Stories. I'm your host, the American historian, Alan Searcy. Today, I'm going to mix things up a little bit and tell you some old ghost stories from the 19th century in Philadelphia. Philadelphia is a great town, and there's a ton of history there. In case you didn't know, it was our nation's capital before it was moved to Washington, D.C. A few years ago, I wrote a book called Southern Ghost Stories Philadelphia, and I uncovered a ton of fun stories from the 1800s. So let's just jump right into it, shall we? In the late 19th century, tenants that lived in the three-story row house at 1302 Wood Street in Callow Hill began reporting strange things to their superintendent, Joseph Reed. According to the residents, a mysterious lady in a long white gown was spotted in various parts of the building from time to time. Joseph didn't believe in ghosts, so he just took the claims in stride. However, one evening in November 1899, Joseph was talking to a tenant in the first floor dining room when the doorbell started to ring. Naturally, Joseph walked over to the door, but when he opened it, he didn't see anybody. Thinking it was a neighborhood kid just having some fun, Joseph walked back to the dining room when he heard a loud bang, and a sad voice cried out, "William, I am thy sister." It was followed by the sounds of a doorbell again. Joseph walked back over to the door, and he opened it. And just like before, nobody was there. So Joseph closed the door, and as he did, he heard a large thud from the second floor, as if a large person had toppled over and fallen out of bed. So the perplexed superintendent ran up the stairs as fast as he could, only to find no one or anything had been disturbed. Abruptly, Joseph heard someone knocking loudly on the door. So he walked back down the stairs to open it, but before he did, he noticed something quite peculiar. The light in the dining room had been turned off. Once again, he walked to the door and found nobody there. So the following night, Elizabeth Reed, Joseph's wife, she stopped by the building to help her husband straighten up some things. When she first arrived, Elizabeth wound a clock in the front room and then started to clean up around the building. Strangely, a short time later, she noticed the clock had stopped. She continued to work for a while until she began to hear a horrible wailing sound coming from the cellar. That was enough for Elizabeth. She hastily wrapped things up and got out of the building as fast as she could. Well, since she didn't get all the cleaning done, Elizabeth decided to come back over the next day to finish where she left off. While working in the front room where the clock had stopped, Elizabeth noticed that chairs and other pieces of furniture were moving on their own. As if that wasn't enough, as soon as the tablecloth flew itself off the table, she heard 3 loud knocks that echoed throughout the building. Once again, this was too much for the poor superintendent's wife. She gathered her things and left before completing all her tasks. Later that week, Ida Terry, a lady who rented a room in the building, she heard a loud noise coming from the cellar. Against her better judgment, the tenant walked down to the cellar and opened the door. She didn't see anything out of the ordinary, so she began to descend the stairs. As soon as Ida's foot touched the bottom step, a shadowy white figure aggressively knocked the lamp out of her hand and grabbed her by the wrist. Ida flew up the stairs, ran right to her room, where she stayed for several days. And due to the experiences of himself, his wife, and those who rented the rooms from him, Joseph Reed brought in a psychic and allowed her to walk through the building to see if she could understand why so many odd things were happening. So as the medium walked through the row house, she began to sense the presence of a husband and a wife that were robbed and murdered in the building. After they were killed, the murderer dug 2 shallow graves in the cellar and buried bodies underneath the building. Well, digging out the cellar was out of the question. But Joseph felt he owed it to his tenants and the spirits there to do something. Hoping to please everyone, Joseph got to work and added some cosmetic touches to the building. By replacing the doors and windowsills and painting the front shutters green, perhaps there wouldn't be any more problems. Wrong. Still, tenants reported strange things happening in their room. Joseph wasn't a superstitious man, but he was open to trying anything to calm the ghost down and keep his tenants happy. Several years earlier, he had a friend that killed a rabbit and kept his foot for good luck. Hoping that a lucky rabbit's foot might help him, Joseph went to see his old friend and he bought it from him. He took the rabbit's foot back to the building and placed it in his office. No luck. The frisky phantoms were more active than ever. At this point, Joseph Reed had no other options than to dig out the cellar and find the remains of the couple that the psychic told him was buried there. Well, he dug for 5 hours, and eventually he found something. He found some bones. However, the bones, they appeared to be quite small. Not knowing exactly what he had found, Joseph took the bones to a pharmacist nearby. Well, according to the medical professional, the bones likely came from an animal and not a human. Having painted the shutters green, replaced the doors and window sills, in addition to digging out the animal bones from the cellar, Joseph didn't know what else to do. Grasping at straws, the weary superintendent took his friend's rabbit foot and buried it in the large hole he created in the cellar. That didn't work either. 2 days later, the tenants began hearing noises all over again. Well, today, the old row house is gone, and in its place is a self-storage facility. Perhaps the spirits there are enjoying hanging out in a small room with someone's drum set or baseball card collection. I stopped there a couple years ago and talked to the people who work there, and they didn't sense anything. Nothing was off there. But still, it's really wild that all this stuff happened there, and now it's a self-storage facility. All right. Now here's another old ghost story from Philadelphia. Shortly after buying a saloon on South 8th Street in the summer of 1884, strange things began to happen to William Conway and his associates. While nothing really happened in the barroom on the first floor, something strange upstairs in the storage area began to make noises and moving things around. At first, William thought little of the second floor specter, until it gradually began to get louder and louder. Late one night in early August, as the saloon was about to close down for the night, William sent a waiter named James upstairs to retrieve some cups. As William went about closing the bar, he heard his employee climb the stairs and open the creaky door to the small stockroom. Within a few seconds, William heard James yell, followed by the sound of a man falling down a flight of stairs. The puzzled saloon owner dropped the cup he was cleaning and ran over to see if his associate was okay. Too shaken up to speak, James dusted himself off and walked over to a table and sat down. William pulled up a chair and asked him if he was okay. The frazzled waiter sat there for a second before he could finally compose himself enough to speak. According to James, as he was ascending the staircase, he heard what sounded like someone walking around in the storage area. Just to make sure a robber wasn't hiding upstairs, he gently cracked the door open and peeked inside. When he realized no one was there, James opened the door and he walked inside. As soon as he entered the storage area, he was greeted by a translucent man with a long beard, wearing a white, flowing wedding dress. Taken aback by the strange spectacle, James stood there for a second, trying to process what he was seeing. Within seconds, an otherworldly being slowly glided over and stood directly in front of him. Too scared to move, James watched in disbelief as the figure in the dress reached up and touched him on both cheeks with his ice-cold hands. At that point, James began to backpedal, and he lost his balance on the stairs. As you would expect, that was James last night working in William Conway's saloon. After James quit, William hired another waiter. Yet, after a week or so, he also quit after seeing the old man in the dress upstairs. In fact, within 1 month, William hired 4 new waiters. Only one of them, a brave young man named Walter Scott, decided to stick around. Well, William was smart and is a very astute businessman. He saw an opportunity to cash in on the bride in the Beard ghost story. He began charging 5 cents to enter the bar just to hear the ghost stories. Well, that equates to almost $3 in 2024. For the small fee, William and Walter told curiosity seekers about the eerie entity on the second floor. By all accounts, William made a small fortune. When the local paper, The Times, ran a story about what was happening on the second floor, people lined up down Walnut Street just to get in. So, since we're on Philadelphia today, I'll answer a question I got about Philadelphia recently. I was at a festival 2 weeks ago, and someone saw the Philadelphia book and asked me what's the most haunted place in Philadelphia. And it's all really subjective, right? But my favorite story is probably Independence Hall, where the Declaration of Independence was signed. In 1793, yellow fever killed thousands of people in Philadelphia, one of which was Joseph Fry, the doorkeeper of the Pennsylvania State House. His body was found in his quarters in the building. Even though the park rangers now who oversee Independence Hall don't talk about the ghost, there are lots of stories about people hearing footsteps and experiencing strange things at night in the old building. I captured an eerie entity of a man in a window there at Independence Hall back in 2022 when I was in Philadelphia researching it for the book. I'll post it on Twitter if you want to see it. I'm at ATO Allen, ALLEN. Well, anyway, if you want to learn more about Philadelphia, check out Southern Ghost Stories Philadelphia. It's a really fun book. Lots and lots of history. It can be found on Amazon.com. And the books are also available at Barnes & Noble. If you go to a store and they don't have them, ask the manager to order them for you. Barnes & Noble, they're kind of funny. Each story carries different titles, and sometimes you just got to ask. So the book is also available on Kindle. All my books are. And they're free to read if you have Kindle Unlimited. So please like the video on YouTube, subscribe to the podcast. Be sure to follow us on Facebook too, Southern Ghost Stories. You can find me on Twitter, like I mentioned. I think it's X now. Sorry, I'm an old man. I get it all confused. I'm at ATO Allen, ALLEN. I drop a lot of interesting ghost stories over there, or Grey Robin tales, or witch trial stories, just weird stuff I get from time to time. So coming up, I'm going to be at Smoky Mountain Terror in Johnson City, Tennessee on June 7th. Make plans to come by and say hello. It's going to be a really fun event. So this episode's been a lot of fun. I love Philadelphia. So you know what I'm going to do? The next episode, it's going to be another story about Philadelphia, or multiple stories about Philadelphia. So be sure to check back with us next time.